and the qualitative, and the quantitative, structured.
CV structures is the way I want to use them.
Don't need to go through this because all that's in there. Okay. Now Peter brought this up earlier today, but interviewing will only be successful if you're considering these 4 things. The first one's rapport. That is how well you get on with the person that you're interviewing. And we know a lot of this comes natural to us in addictions health and youth development, because we actually know that central to the client, or central to the young person, youth worker, client, professional, young person and youth worker relationship is that rapport. And if we don't have that rapport, pretty much in the first 15 minutes, it's a very hard fight to fight. And when you're working particularly with broken young people, it's really hard to get rapport in a research project because they're sick and tired of being researched. Because every time they get pulled into SIFs, it's like another research project's being done. Researchers use the same tools as SIFs use to do the assessments. That's what it feels like for a young person. Doing a one-on-one interview with a young person, well, they've got that all their life in SIFs. Seeing going for a test with young people, they've got that all their life in SIFs. So for a researcher to walk into a room and say, I want to build rapport with you so we can have an interview for a project, no. So this younger person that I'm mentoring, I've said to her, well, why don't you do something different? We often say to our research participants, come join in the project, and if it's young people, we'll give you pizza at the end. So why not actually do some activities with them before you even do the research project and give them pizza before you even start? With young people, pizza is the doorway into everything often.
It works.
So the idea of pizza, actually really trying to do the rapport thing is quite important. Reciprocity, I can't Reciprocity. Giving back. This is big for me, and it's big for qualitative researchers. You shouldn't be the only one getting something from the process. You getting their story, that's just good for you. But it's unfair for the person that's given the story if they haven't had more than just a thanks. And ethics committees do look at this. When I did the United Nations project, I was asked to do focus groups with young people. I said, no, I'm not doing focus groups. That's going to bore them shitless. Having 4 young people, 6 young people all talking about their experiences while me as a researcher sits down and writes notes all the way I'm talking to you now, nah, that's not going to work, sorry. I'm just being honest, that won't work. That's what I said to the organisation that paid me. I said, but if you give me a day with every young person in groups, because they wanted focus groups, and you let me teach them in that day how to make a digital story, how to do a soundtrack to that story, how to fill that story with their voice, how to fill that story with photos, but protect their identity in those photos, I can guarantee you that I can make this work. And every young person that went into that project came out with a video, came out with a research report that was written for them by another young person, came out with a video screening time, so at the end of each day, parents and anyone else that was involved in the project, because it wasn't just schools that we went to, they got to come and view the videos that were made. And what was big was on a Marae that we went, and the parents were like, we never ever realised how gifted our young people were. They were always taonga to us, but we never realised the world that they saw outside of the Marae. Because that was what these young people were talking to in their stories, was youth unemployment, which wasn't a huge experience for them, but a huge experience for their mates outside. What was it? Child abuse definitely wasn't an issue for them, but an issue for the kids on the outside that they could see. I'm just talking to the Marae stories here. The most powerful one, though, was a story that they did, which was from their heart, which was on racism and the foreshore and seabed legislation, and how the discrimination that was in New Zealand. And it was a really powerful video, And to think that, you know, the UN got to see that and got to see their video, but then their parents, their whole family got to see it. So to me, in that project too, I said I also wanted to make sure I wasn't using, sorry Richard, apples. I wanted to make sure I was using PCs with technology that the young people or their communities could buy. So that way, once the young people had learnt, and this was in particular, I was at an alt ed centre, and I can say alt ed centre, somewhere in New Zealand, not in the Wellington region, and the young guys suddenly realised I was teaching them how to use a program called Sony Express, which is a program to make music, and they could lay down some beats, pick up a microphone, start rapping, and they were like, "Thanks, miss." The giving back is so important. Another alt ed centre we went to, and I do emphasise the importance of giving back. So when you're looking at qualitative reports, ask, how is the researcher giving back? The stories are told now. They are not things to be, like my woman taught me in my masters, are not things to be cut up for your own purpose. They're told us. How's the researcher respecting them? So the biggest experience for me, and I do get very teary-eyed about some of these things, was we went to an alt ed centre, and these things are over a whole day. The kids were told that they had to be part of the project by the centre. I came in and said, no, guys, you don't have to be part of the project. This is informed consent. You choose to be part of the project. If you don't want to be part of the project, stay out. But at least just stay for 5 minutes and hear what the project's about. Oh, no, I don't really want to be part of this project. I'm sick and tired. That's what we got straight away. So just let us tell you what it's about. So we gave them a talk about what it was about. They're going to create a story. They'll learn some programs. They'll get this. They all opted in. By their own consent, they opted in. And they were working all through the centre on their projects and stories. And we had lunch. And we came and had lunch with the young people because that's part of being a qualitative researcher, being nosy, being with. We sat down at the tables with them, but they wouldn't let us rise. They wanted to serve us. And then we finished the day, we played the stories, and in this particular alt ed centre there was an importance of liminal moments, which my students can tell you about. So they wanted to honour the teacher by giving back, so honour us by giving back. And it was myself and Specs One, who's a famous hip-hop artist in Wellington. And no, they didn't stay for her because she's actually a graffiti artist and she's about my age, and no young person knows her unless they're in Newtown. And it wasn't in the Wellington region either. But she is the cousin scribe, and Lady Six is her sister. So we sat down in the circle, and each young person went round and gave us a gift in their own way, just by talk. And then at the end, this one young person got up. He stood up. For 5 minutes, he spoke in Samoan. And if you know the Samoan concept called lava, that's lava for the space. The idea that space needs to be created where there's honouring and it's a spiritual space. He got up and spoke, and you felt that presence happening really deeply. And then the teachers were crying, and we were crying as researchers. And at the end, the teachers came to us and said, "You realise the whole time he's been with us, he's denied his Samoan identity. He's tried to call himself Māori because all the other boys are Māori. That's the only way he wants to be seen in this world. He doesn't want to be seen for who he is. For the first time, and he's been with us for over 2 years, he's spoken in Samoan." And look, you know, I know we went through all the politics of research and how difficult it can be, but if you're a researcher with heart and you go in there with the desire to actually give back, I see myself first as a youth worker, not as a researcher. I just have those skills. I was talking to Paul Schrader, who many of you have got as a teacher. He's like, I want my addiction students to go and do our masters, because our addiction students, they have all this experience. If they step into this qualitative space, our addiction students at this Polytechnic are game changers. Real game changers. And I can speak for the BYDers too. I see that we have because we can go into these spaces not just as a researcher, but go into this space and bring the techniques of our profession. and honour whether it be young people or our clients, and give back. I teach to give back to the youth sector, and the BYD students know that I will say continuously, it was a youth worker that saved me from the gutter as a huffer when I was 15 years old, and at that point I realised that I wanted to, well, I actually want to be a counsellor, but I got told there were no jobs. So I decided to become a teacher, and then I realised how our education system is so broken. But I realised the whole time that I was actually a youth worker, and it wasn't until, about 4 years ago, just before I started the BYD, I had to give a keynote up at Leach at Vic, and I said, I'm a youth worker, that's who I am in my soul. But that's why I'm down here teaching, because it's a space that I can give back. Anyway, I've gone on my little waffle about giving back.
Yeah. Kia ora. That's lovely.
In an interview, you've also got to, you're giving back, but you've also got to accept the accept and be excited by the unexpected. You never know what someone's going to say in an interview, and actually when you're reading your reports, and this is particularly will come to the case in your reports, if you're looking at qualitative stuff, you'll read things like, I never expected to hear this. I never expected from the woman that I interviewed to actually hear how empowering being a female is. I never expected to hear that, because I had been taught by the university that being a female is being what's called subjugated, being under a male and living in a male world, not having the roles and not having the tools of, you'll never have access to the tools of what males have access, real feminist style stuff. And here I am with this woman, and the unexpected was, hey, there is power in being a female. You got to have self-confidence, and the only way you can get this, and I use it in the other stuff called pilot, and that's by practicing. I do mock ones if I'm going out to interview over and over again. They can tell me whether my questions are going to work, but if I'm going to have to learn how to prompt, and this is why, particularly in counselling, you have so many sort of mock role plays of having to learn how to work with clients and respond to different situations and things that are going on. We covered a lot of these in the morning, but Anne Oakley, who's a very famous feminist researcher, just points out that qualitative researchers have to be really, really careful to realise that they're actually the ones that hold the power in the research process. What that basically means is that when I am engaged in a qualitative interview, I can often see myself as being on the same level as the person that I'm interviewing, whereas actually the person that I'm interviewing actually sees me as someone that's quite powerful. This happens in our professional stuff as well. When you're working with a young person and you're thinking, because this is very evident in youth work, when you're walking alongside a young person all the time, actually you hold the keys.
That could actually apply to anyone in vulnerability really as well. I mean, I've got older addicted clients, and they're extremely vulnerable, and it's and like you said about that power thing, it's a huge thing. It's a huge thing to know that and to acknowledge it, and just to be really careful with it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a matter of, I think often as youth workers it's hard because we always get taught that we're working with young people, not for young people or on young people.
No.
But often it's quite hard to realise that actually a little thing like I'll pick on Cliff in your project that you did with the young guys in Upper Hutt, the building project.
Oh,
Yeah, that was very much a project that was with, but you still very much had the power in that project. Like if a young person said, look, Cliff, can't be F today, you'd be the one saying, well, if you can't be F, you're going to stay at home. You probably need to rethink about whether you're going to be part of this project at all, but I'm not having you sitting around disrupting the rest of the project. So that's what we mean, that there's always someone that's got the power. And Anne's just trying to point out that often researchers forget this. They're so open-minded that they forget it. and at that point about who gains and the idea to give back. And that rapport for researchers is often quite false. I'm going to be really, I think it's for any professional, I'm going to be really friendly and say, I'm interested in you. Then after supervision, I really can't be stuffed with this. Yeah. So actually really understanding that sometimes people, you might build rapport with someone, but actually on your side it could actually be quite false. You've got a closure and an end date. When it comes to research, that's what it's like. You've got a closure and an end date. And so someone like me gets into trouble when I say I don't mind people I research with, and I say research with, like youth work, if they want to keep a relationship going, that's fine. But if they want to close it, that's fine.
Whose responsibility is that? Is that a mutual agreement, or like how would you?
Well, I do acknowledge I had the power. So if I was, if I had been involved with research with QT, I would say to you at the end, I don't mind staying in contact if you want, but I totally respect what you would like.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say with the young people I've worked with, the centres were just the centres were kept in contact with me that I went to for a while, but all relationships dribble and drabble to an end.
Yeah.
You learn that, even research relationships. But in all of that though, as you saw with that story, I see everything that I've been given as taonga. So even though the relationships have finished, the treasure that was given to me still remains treasure.
Yeah.
And I still get very, very angry with people when that doesn't happen. Now we're going to quickly get through the rest of this, but another type of interviewing is focus group interviewing. I mentioned that a few times, and that's often when you're working with a group of 4 to 6 and you're asking them all questions. It should never ever, and you may see this in research reports, it should never ever be used as a method by itself. Focus groups are very, very problematic. Very problematic. And it's simply for a basic reason, and that is the rapport is harder to build up with all the individuals. And if one individual, and actually, Ola, I'm going to pick on you for this, if one individual is, and I can pick on the BYD students, so you others are very lucky. If one individual is incredibly quiet, although you're a quiet person, aren't you? Okay. If one person is incredibly quiet, you could be sitting there disagreeing with everyone. So the focus group could be on what is the best hip hop music for you New Zealand youth. And one guy at the focus group, whose name's Cliff, says that the best hip hop music continues to be Upper Hut Posse. Okay? Yeah, so Cliff's in agreement there. If the Upper Hut Posse is the best hip hop music for New Zealand youth, and they need to be fed it today. And Cliff is adamant, and he's loud, and he's rocketing. And Arahina's there. She's going, yeah. I'm not gonna say anything about this against this guy, because if I speak against this guy, his sister's gonna ditch me. And then, anyway, and Ola's there in the corner going. And me as a researcher come out of it going, okay, according to this focus group, not an individual in this focus group, but according to this focus group, the best hip hop music in New Zealand is Upper Hut Posse, and you should continue to look at it, to listen to it. In fact, as one focus group participant put it, and then I'll quote Cliff, and then during the focus group, a focus group participant said this, and again I quote Cliff, and then during this focus group, a focus group student said, person said this, quote Cliff. And so Cliff's dominated that entire focus group. Arahina's gone with the flow, and so therefore I figured that that's the way it's going. Ola's busy going, when is this going to end? When is this going to end? And so I've got no real information from that group. Okay, so if you're using the focus group at any time for anything, always triangulate. Always get other sources of information. And a focus group, and you'll notice on the example I put up on Moodle on the MindBuy stuff, I've said I've used a focus group, and then I've got this is problematic. But what they did in the focus group, and I point that out on the map that I've done, is they actually had a second researcher at that group. And a second researcher is really powerful because the second researcher will then be just taking observation notes, and she'll come to me afterwards and say, did you really notice that one of the focus group participants was slowly moving away towards the door? And did you notice that another participant was very dominant in the discussion? And did you also notice that your focus group of 3 consisted of 2 females and 1 male? And then I'll be like, okay. And then I will actually write that into my findings. In this focus group, 1 participant dominated the entire focus group, and this is what he had to say. So
So it wasn't a focus group.
So it really wasn't a focus group. It was an interview of 1. Okay. So, and you also have to be really, really skilled. And I can say the best focus group runners are youth workers. Not because they know how to get lots of voices, not because they know how to get everyone talking. It's because they have multiple methods for data gathering. So youth workers, wherever we go, we always carry a supply of these. And this can be one of the most important focus group tools of your life. So it's like, I'll give everyone in the focus group a post-it, and I'll say, okay, write down your favourite hip-hop band. So they all write it down. Go and stick it on the wall. They all stick it on the wall. Now make an argument for why your band is the best band in the world. So then they've got to vocalise it out. Or that target activity I did with you last week, where you put the words on the target, I might give you the words on the post-it and have a giant target. Everyone put the post-it notes on the target where they fit for you. And then I had the talking in that happening. So for Hina, who's the master student on mentoring, for her project she's doing with young people on Hope, she is doing one of the activities, and the BYD students will know this, one of the activities she's doing is an egg with a straw around it, and you've got to drop the egg and the egg's going to be protected. Okay, and we use that to teach what's called developmental assets in the BYD. But what she's going to do is use that, and each young person, when they put a straw around the egg, they have to name something in their community that gives them hope. So it could be, my grandfather gives me hope. So, and once they get 50 things, they then create the basket around the egg and drop the egg and learn together that hope comes together. So there's a learning that happens in it too. And then the next one that she's got, she's doing eco-mapping. Our students in the BYD will know what that is. When you're looking at different worlds in the young person's life and where they fit. It's a very physical activity, so she's doing that with the young people as well. Continuums, where you stand where you want to stand. They all have their problems, but with triangulation, some of the youth development activities work really well. So we'll just quickly do this, but focus groups can actually occur once you've done your initial data gathering, and then they occur as a form of triangulation. Okay, so I've got a whole lot of data. For example, the NCEA, we did the survey, we found out that young people would only do things if they thought they would get credits. So we went to the focus group and we asked them that, they said yes, and then I said, but is this really true? If you were passionate about something at school, would you actually do it anyhow? And most young people in those focus groups said yes. So we found that the driving motivation for young people in NCEA was credits, but actually the experience of learning in itself meant much more than education. Learning happened outside of the classroom as well. Focus groups can also, though, happen before you even start a research project, and that just gives you a picture of what's happening in the world. Okay, so, and I might not even use them as data for the research. I might go, I want to research students' experiences of research courses at Reltec. I'll do a quick focus group with 6 students, get that, and then I'll know the key questions I need to ask when I go to do my research project. So we don't need to. I've gone through all of this stuff already about BYD doing it, and just finally the final bits and pieces. One of the most, I love this picture. It's a Microsoft Word picture. I think she's one of the most beautiful people to have ever been photographed. So it's just a general picture I picked up, but I'll leave it there. So one of the most important mechanisms of data gathering too can be photos and videos. And the old adage says, a picture tells you 1,000 words. So the power of a photo can be really, really huge. And also we talked about this morning, text analysis. So like it's used in quantitative, but in qualitative research it's used slightly differently. So we're looking at themes in text analysis and qualitative interviewing, qualitative research. My type of research is the last type. Discourse analysis is the formal term, but the way that we'll talk about it is it's a deconstruction of knowledge. So we take the knowledge that we have today and we deconstruct it to find the history of that knowledge and the roots of that knowledge. This is where it started for me with this quote here. A deconstruction of knowledge. Peachskin, Bailey Jr. Kurariki, killed at 12. Kararanga Makabi Te Rongna at 14. Their faces are too young to be giveaways for the violence that festered and flared and struck out. They look disturbingly like the kids next door. Like kids who skateboard and learn maths and play on computers. They're our children, worse than they used to be. It's this onset of a wave of hideous child crime payback for some creepy national deficit. Who will be the next person going happily about their business to be belted over the head and murdered for nothing? Kurariki and Te Ranga were not alone. Other kids were there at the kill. Are we becoming a society rotten at birth where doors need to be locked, not just against ingrained criminals, but children of trick-or-treat age?
What motive is that?
That's a feature article from the Dominion Post in 2002. It's part of my data for my PhD. So my PhD is a solid text analysis. And what I would go through, and this is, I'm just giving a demonstration how discourse analysis works or textual analysis. I'd go through and find key words and key descriptors and find the problematic, deconstruct the knowledge behind it. So peach skin, Bailey Kurariki Jr. Peach skin, the Māori who look like a Pākehā. Peach skin, the Māori who look like a Pākehā. Two Māori names in the very top sentence. Fails to actually mention the Pākehā kid that murdered a police officer in the same year. There were about 6 murders that year by young people. Fails to mention any Pākehā names at all. Picks some of the most extreme examples. So Bailey being involved with the death of Michael Cho, and Kararanga being involved with the death of Kenneth Pickett in Waitara. Her and 2 others hit Kenneth Pickett, stole his pickup truck from him and hit him over the head with a hammer. So these are really horrendous crimes. I'm not knocking that. But I start to go, why is it that our New Zealand papers are focusing predominantly on our young Māori? What is it? And why is it that they make a point of making one Māori appear Pākehā? Why is it that they also make it seem like these are the kids next door? What's going on when they talk about this word national? I can never say these things. What's that? Deficiency. You can really tell I can't read that well. Who will be the next person? We're not there. Other kids were there. Are we society rotten at birth? I'll pick up on that. Ingrained criminals, but children of trick-or-treat age.
What about at the kill? I mean, that's pretty emotive.
Yeah, I'm not. If I was doing this for a moral panic analysis, because that's another type of analysis,
maybe that's how I'm looking
I
at
would
it, yeah.
look directly at the emotive stuff. Yeah. But my key thing is to understand who are these young people that they're framing to be criminals in New Zealand. And what I find is that in news media, predominantly it's Māori.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the way that they make these kids seem inhuman is really, these are monsters, these aren't humans.
Ingrained criminals.
Then I start to find that, because I'm not just looking at the media, my other source, my triangulation, is government. And I find in government reports, a typical phrase gets said over and over again. While Māori and Pacific youth are not at risk of criminal violence, they are more likely to be involved in criminal violence. What does that mean? They're not at risk, but they're going to do it, so they are at risk.
Yeah.
It's jargon to try and undo something. So I'm like, okay, so they're also saying, if you're brown, you're a problem.
Yeah.
Then I jump to the next thing, which is academia. And academia is clearly not saying, I thought, if you're brown, you're a problem, but then the Dunedin study comes out and says the MAOA gene, there's a possibility that Māori have it at a smaller scale, which then means that if they experience abuse, it puts them at risk of being criminal. I'm like, right, I'll just put that study aside, I'll still critique it and I'll put it to the side. What was disturbing about that study though is they called it the warrior gene.
Yeah.
So then I start to get really critical here. And then what I do, and the BYDs have been exposed to this in the degree, is I go, well, where did this idea of ethnicity equals deviance start?
1840.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I agree with that.
Exactly,
I'm looking in particular, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at the things knowledge-wise, and I'm also looking at young people in particular. And while I agree totally, it is 1840, I go, it all comes down to a way that psychology is a science that was born out of the 1800s. We all think psychologically. We're training you to think psychologically. And the issue with that is that at the same time colonisation was happening around the world, and Darwin was writing The Survival of the Fittest, and he didn't just write that one, he wrote of the origin of the species, and then of the origin of the species, he talks about races dying out because they simply weren't civilised. And some races been able to actually achieve civilised positions. The races that could achieve civilised positions were Māori, Asian, Indian, Pacific. The races that Darwin believed would die out were African, Aboriginal, some South American races, and Native American, they put in that they could become civilised. So that's where all your policies of assimilation come in. But then one theorist takes that theory and he applies it to the development of young people as individuals. G. Stanley Hall. And he basically says that some young people will not achieve adulthood because they're simply not born European.
Yeah. So is that, like Māori fit into that criteria because we gave them a cup of tea when they're taking our land and killing us?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It was a colonising mindset. I'm not saying it's a Western mindset, it was a colonising mindset. We have to be careful when we go back into whakapapa to not say that this was a complete Western. It was a colonising mindset.
It's true though.
And it's the same mindset that we see occurring today. That all of this whakapapa is back. That's the place of cultural studies, and that's the place of textual analysis. I put an extreme example up, but it was, the way that, because it's not only for ethnicity, it's also, and I jump back into my university shoes here, but it's also the way that women are talked about. And, just the fact that, what was it, apparently my favourite Olympian of all times, Simone Biles, amazing African-American gymnast.
Yes, gymnast, yeah.
Oh, the Biles. She gets to carry the American flag, and they call her the media call her the Dainty Biles.
Yeah.
They would never call a male flag bearer the Dainty Biles.
No.
So language is quite powerful, and where I step in, the field that I step in, is we have to know the whakapapa. So this is where textual analysis comes in. Oh, you've done that this
It's a
morning.
terrible piece of writing too.
Yeah, it was Diane Decker who wrote that.
I know Diane Decker.
Yeah.
I was a journalist for 25 years. I just can't believe she wrote something so bad.
Back in that 2002 for me was a gold mine when it came to the media. The media were completely out.
That's why I left. It's awful.
But what I also found out in my PhD suite is you cannot blame the media. So what we saw there, whakapapa's back into academia. And that's what the sad thing, that's that sad thing is actually all the media does, and this is what my key finding in my PhD was, is they take what was once expertise knowledge 100 years ago and turn it into common sense today. So the way that, and that particularly came to youth and youth crime. So the expertise knowledge of 100 years ago was, you know, pretty much you can't trust any Māori. They're going to rob you.
Okay, yeah.
Totally ridiculous mindset. And now, but within the academic mindset, it was these people will never be civilised. And the only way to make them civilised is to assimilate them. Now, it's even worse for our Aboriginal neighbours over in Aussie.
Oh,
Because if you look at I always go to the G. Stanley Hall thing. Can I just show you one thing?
yeah.
Because we're pretty much finished. I'll show
G.
you
Stanley Hall. What's G. Stanley Hall?
the father of adolescence.
Oh.
You can turn that camera off, Lisa, if it's still going.
G. Stanley Hall. I have to read about it. Right.